All right, everyone, we have 3:30, so it's time to get started. Welcome back to COM 426, Modern Web Programming. This is lecture 23. All right, so we'll give everyone a chance to settle down, then we'll get started with announcements. All right, so good news. So happy Tuesday. This is our last full week of class of the semester, which is very, very exciting. So again, all the assignments for this class at this point have been completed. You've submitted A07, the design lab. You also finished kind of the F1 presentations on Friday last week, and some of you, on either Monday or Thursday. So amazing work there. It was great to see all of your prototypes and your ideas. And so I think that the final projects, once you get around to the final project showcase, will be really, really exciting to look at everything. There's some really, really good ideas, great designs as well. So I will note here that, again, everything has kind of been submitted. We're working on A05. I believe A05 grades went out. We're working on A06. We apologize for the delay here because these are more complex projects, especially Oriole, right? Grading as well as getting all the deployment issues fixed took some time. So thank you for your patience. If you notice anything glaring or anything looks correct with the A05 grading, please let me know. I think some people have emailed, so I'll try and respond as soon as I can to those. And then, so the only thing that's left now that projects or kind of our coding assignments are done, and of course readings are done, now is until the end of the semester is really just focusing on final projects. So the only thing that you have to do for this class, kind of over the next week and a half, will be working on kind of your first main part of development. So this development sprint 1. There are details on the website about what is expected for this. In general, this is going to be around kind of working through 3 of your 5 features and having them deployed and working on Vercel. And so we will look through these. I will look through these kind of right after you're all submitted. And then by the end of the next day, after it's due on Wednesday, goal is that you should all have some sort of feedback given. If there's anything that is glaring that needs to be fixed, there'll be a comment there in Gradescope. So you should have feedback within 24 hours of your submission. And so again, this is due on kind of our first chunk of this is due that Tuesday. So this is right before kind of Thanksgiving break starts on Wednesday. So you have the full time to work, and then you also have a lot of time after this to kind of finish your last 2 features, polish things up, etc. And so more details about kind of what happens after we'll talk about that on Thursday. So next lecture, kind of more details as to what happens after Sprint 1. And then the last note here that I have, I believe that UNC teaching evaluations have opened, which means that for all of your classes, probably got an email asking you to fill out a survey about the course and how the course has been taught. And so this will be open until the end of the semester. I would greatly appreciate if you all filled this out for this course. It would be extremely, extremely helpful, especially if we want to teach a course like this again. Those evaluations will help for that to happen. So and also there's kind of a bit of an incentive here. So if we kind of get over an 80% participation rate, then we can add some extra credit to the overall grade. I believe last semester we did hit this number. So I think that it is doable as well. So you have a long time to work on this. Please fill this out. Greatly would appreciate it. Are there any questions with any of the announcements here? Amazing. So what we're going to be talking about today, we've kind of finished up with our design module last time talking about accessibility. And so we have a few slots left in our schedule. And so what we're going to use today to talk about, and also we'll be expanding a little bit on Thursday, is kind of the periphery, other miscellaneous technologies and things that are very useful for us to know as developers, especially for building out these web applications that we've been working on. In particular, what we're going to be talking about today will be really helpful as well for kind of you working through your final projects. And so all of the details, right, that we kind of go over, the goal is today, what you see, you should be able to directly kind of use as you're working on final projects. And there's some really nice things that kind of Vercel and our deployment tools offer that we're going to be discussing. And so again, I've introduced this concept, right, of deployment actually really early on. You all have been since A01 all the way back. Remember, I know that you all have done a lot since then, right? Working on your base HTML, CSS, JavaScript, no, just HTML and CSS a website or your personal portfolio that you used Vercel to get online, right? So getting it on the web so that somebody can actually access it using a real URL. And so we've been doing this from the beginning. Even though the technology that we have been using to build our applications and our websites has become more sophisticated, right? This has been something that we have been doing all this time. And so again, just to recap, right, what we have been doing when we use something like Vercel, we are deploying our application to the web. That is the terminology that we use. In particular, when I say deployment, all this is just getting your project that you might be running locally, all the code, HTML, etc., onto a server so that other people can access what you've been working on. Right? That is the entire idea behind deployment. And there are various tools that you can use to do this. So in this class, we've been using Vercel to do this. However, there are many other tools. Some may have heard of Netlify. Fly.io is another one. You can deploy using GitHub, in fact, right? GitHub pages. And I know that some, in fact, if you go to our course website, right, it's comp42625f.github.io, or other courses might have a website like that. And so those are websites that are deployed using GitHub. In particular, though, what, again, we've been using in class is Vercel. And Vercel is just this entire complete what we call cloud deployment platform. Right? So the idea is it is a system or a service that allows us to deploy our applications in a very easy manner. Right? We don't have to manually access some server, right, and kind of put our files into the server. We can use this nice system to do it for us. And in particular, Vercel, which is the company, right, that is helping us with our deployment, they are also the team behind Next.js. So the framework that you've been using, developers at Vercel are the ones who are helping to develop, maintain, and continue to augment features in Next.js. And so when we talk about deployment platforms like Vercel, right, the first point here is pretty standard. This is what we have been doing, right, deploying our projects to the web. That is the main purpose of something like Vercel. But there are also other things as well that come along with this. Namely, the second one here, setting up and connecting projects to domains. So the terminology here, domain, is just a URL, right, that your site is accessible from. So for example, if your name, if you're, I don't know, if your name was John Doe, for example, you might have A07, right, -designlab-John Doe or .vercel.app, right? That is a domain that you can use that when you go to that URL, your website appears. All of you have many of these now from A1 all the way to A7. This is just an example of a domain. And so Vercel creates that domain for you, right? It sets up everything that's needed, for example, in DNS to say that this is when someone accesses this domain, you're going to go to this server, and then you're going to get your website. Right? So all of this is managed. And in fact, if you wanted, there are many services, and I believe that we released a supplement all the way back many months ago on essentially taking your personal portfolio and getting it right kind of as a real website and using your own custom domain. You can, through Vercel or through other platforms like, for example, Namecheap, buy your own domain. So for example, in my case, right, ajaygandecha.com, that's my domain I own. And then I can set that up in Vercel so that my Vercel deployment is accessible using that domain instead of a .vercel.app domain. So managing domains is a very important part of getting our websites up and running, right? Most of the production apps that you use do not have, for example, a .vercel.app kind of extension, right? You either own your own domain or you pay probably monthly or something for this. And so that is a very important thing that is managed by Vercel. And then the last thing here is analytics. This is something that we're going to come back to near the end of lecture. There's a huge amount of things that you can do with analytics in your project. And that is something that's also because, right, these cloud platforms are taking network requests in, right? When someone requests your website, it goes to Vercel's server, for example, to go and get that data out. Well, then since that server is responsible for getting all these network requests, it can then track them and essentially perform analytics on it so that you are able to learn different things. For example, where your users are from, maybe what time of day they access your site, and even many other things, what types of pages, like what specific pages they're loading, and more. So we'll be talking a little bit about this. Any questions here so far? Amazing. Another piece of terminology here that I want to introduce today, because this is really going to be helpful for your final projects, and this is also really helpful in the real world as you're working on projects and in industry, is this term called CI/CD. Has anyone heard of or kind of heard of this before? Yeah, so we have a few, right? This acronym has been used quite a bit. Maybe some classes like Comp 423 might briefly touch on this, but it's still very important, especially for our class. And CI/CD is essentially two different acronyms, right? You have CI and then you have CD. These are two related things, but they are also slightly different. Kind of like UI UX, right, in design. So we have another pair here of acronyms. And so the first one is this idea of continuous integration, which is this idea that, well, as you are developing your project, you're constantly making changes to your code base, for example, making new commits, etc. As we are iterating and building on our project, we want to make sure that the changes that we make, for example, do not break our entire site. Or, we want to make sure that they build correctly, that they would be able to be deployed if needed, and just to make sure that along the way, as we're developing, we do not introduce a bunch of bugs into our project. So that is this entire idea of CI, continuous integration. And then we also have CD, continuous delivery. And the idea here is that, well, as you are developing your project and you are releasing new features, right? For example, let's say I add a new page to my site, or I add some new, I add a new feature. Well, I want users who are currently using the site, right, to be able to see the changes live. So when I go and, for example, finish this particular feature and I merge it in, right? I'm done with that branch. I put it into the main branch. I want that to actually be deployed so that everybody can essentially use that new feature, right? And so those are kind of our two pieces here, CI, CD. And Vercel helps us to manage CI/CD for us. And there's many, many great features that Vercel has that makes developing projects easier and kind of help us to catch and prevent errors kind of before they make it to production, where a user might encounter it. Okay? And so what I would like to kind of talk about here, and this helps us, this idea here helps us with kind of connecting this idea of deployments to the CI/CD and what Vercel allows, is that whenever you make a push, so you push a change to a repository connected to Vercel. So for example, in your A6 or A7 assignment, right, that is something you deploy to Vercel. So these are connected. Vercel knows that that's the repository it's looking at. And so whenever I make a change or push to the repository, Vercel is actually going to build the project. And it's going to try and create a deployment for it. And this will allow us, right, to essentially catch errors that may happen. Because if it tries to build your project and there's an error when that happens, it can alert you as the developer that, hey, what you just did ended up breaking the website. You need to go and look into that, right? And so that's kind of the main thing that happens there. And so Vercel manages and creates multiple deployments of your project, right? So essentially putting your project on their servers at different stages of the project. So for example, before I make a feature, as I am working on the feature, and then also once I release the feature. And so we're going to be seeing this in a live example and well as some diagrams. But Vercel essentially keeps track of two different types of deployments. The first one is a production deployment, which is essentially just what your ultimate user will end up seeing. This is the deployment that is going to be visible at the domain that you have set. So for example, if my website is at a URL like example.vercel.app, well, that particular domain will be pointing to a production deployment. And so that kind of follows that there's only one production deployment that is attached to a domain at a time. Right? Because when you go to a website, you only see one version of the website. So you cannot have kind of multiple different versions of your project loading, right, at your URL. You want just one. And so that's why we have one production deployment. The cool thing, though, and this might be, it's a little bit shocking to think about, but we're going to see examples of this, is that actually, in addition to just these production deployments, Vercel also creates these private preview deployments. So every single time that, for example, you make a change to your project, you push a new change to a branch, it will actually go and try and deploy that particular version of your project on the web. It's not going to be at the domain that you set, right? Because this is a private deployment. But the idea is it's going to try and build the project, right? Does the project even build? Did I introduce any errors? And then afterward, it gives you a URL that you can then go look and see, oh, I just made this change. Let me see what this would look like in production. And then you can click that link and you can see the version kind of that project live. Any questions so far? All right. I'm going to show first a quick diagram, and then we're going to go and see a live example on Vercel's website. And so for those of you who took either Com 423 or Com 211 with CC, you've probably seen, right, these Git diagrams, or in Com 290 with me and Noah a while ago. Right? So this is something that, again, if we just try to familiarize ourselves, right, this is kind of the Git commit history for a project. We have a label here for main, that's a branch. And so you can see that in my project so far, I have made 3 commits. Right? I have added a login page, I have added a sign-up page, and then I added a home page. So these are 3 different things that I've committed. And my main branch is currently pointing to my current, my latest commit, right, in the history. And so what happens here is when you make a commit, so let's say that I made this at home page commit, and my main branch is what Vercel is tracking to be, this is what I want users to see. So anything on the main branch, this is what should be deployed to everyone who has your URL. It will create a production deployment. So you can see here this icon of a circle that's red, and then we have a production label here. This is a production deployment. And so Vercel will create a build. Right? It's going to run through. Remember, we talked about all the way back in lecture 3, that build step. Right? We build our project. We create all these JavaScript files that we have to put on the server. Right? Remember that? So when you make a commit, Vercel is going to do this automatically. It's going to build your project, and then it's going to take those files and put it on the server and make it visible to anyone with your URL. So this is my production deployment. And then remember what we had said earlier, which is that we have one single production deployment that is attached to our domain at any given time. So you can see here, if I have a website like example.vercel.app, well, currently that particular domain is pointing to that particular deployment, the deployment that is labeled there with prod. And so whenever anyone goes to that domain, they're going to see the project at the state after I added the home page. Right? So that particular commit, the files that are in there, that is what is on the server, and that is what the user will ultimately see. Any questions with this base diagram here so far? Amazing. So now, what if I want to, let's say I'm a developer, and let's say that I have like 1,000 users. I know this website doesn't have anything on it, but let's just imagine, right, for the sake of argument, we have 1,000 users who are sitting on a homepage right now. They're doing whatever. And I want to develop a profile page. So I want users to be able to see their profile, maybe change their avatar image, etc. And so how I might go about doing this, if you're following kind of GitHub best practices, right, would be to create a new branch. So I'm going to create a branch. In this case, I've named it Feat Profile Page. So oftentimes it's a good practice to kind of have the type of what you're working on first, like a feature, feat, / and then the name of the feature. This is best practice with Git. So we have here feature for my profile page. And I'm going to work on this branch. So I'm going to kind of work on the profile page while on this branch. And I'm not going to essentially modify main directly. Right? Why should I not? This is an open question. Anyone can answer. Why should I not kind of just make commits to my main branch? At this point. So like if I'm working on the profile feature, let's say I add a button, and maybe I'm currently working on it. I commit my changes. I go for a coffee break, right? Why would that not be a good idea to essentially push that directly to the main branch? Yeah. Exactly. Yep. So remember, right, our deployment right now, our domain is kind of attached to this main branch. It's tracking this main branch. So if I were to create a new commit on my main branch and say, I'm like, here's work in progress, working on this feature. Well, that is going to eventually be built, and that's what's going to appear to users. Because we're going to create a new production build, and our domain will then point to our kind of unfinished feature. And so it's best practice to work on a new branch. Do not affect what users see until you're fully ready to kind of merge that feature in and get it working. And so you can see here that let's say that I am developing this feature and I am creating the page. Let's say I just created a blank profile page right now in Next.js and I make a commit. Right? So you can see here I have a new commit, and that branch name, that feat profile page, follows, right, this new commit. Right? Main has not changed. My domain and my production deployment has not changed because that's the main branch is what users are going to see. We're on a brand new branch here. The good thing, though, and the cool thing with Vercel is that once I make this commit, Vercel is notified, right? So Vercel sees every time we make a new commit to our repository, and Vercel is going to create this preview build for this particular commit. Right? So remember, there's this difference between our production build and our preview builds. Production build is what is attached to our domain. Preview builds are just Vercel is creating a version of our project, putting it online so that we can see it and we can make sure that everything's working. But this is not the version, right? Not the version that the user ends up seeing. And so you can see here that Vercel will create a preview build at this point. And so the developer is then notified that, hey, if this build failed, let's say that I have a syntax error in my new page that I created and I tried pushing this up, Vercel is going to try and build this and create a running version of the site at this point. And it'll say, wait, there's a syntax error here. The build failed. I'm going to send you an email. I'm going to alert you and say that this did not work. Right? You introduced a bug here in your project that you need to go and fix. Right? So that is kind of the benefit of having this particular preview build here. And the great thing is that it will give you a domain. So I can actually see the version of my project at this point, which is a different URL than what all my users see. Again, we'll see an example of this in a moment on a real deployment. Again, though, the note here is that my domain, which is example.vercel.app, that is what all my thousands of users are viewing, they are not seeing the project at this point in my history. They're seeing the version that's still our production build, the one that actually works and the one that is on our main branch. Okay? Any questions with this? Yes. Good question. So it will create a preview build every time. Yeah. So it's even if you have multiple branches, 10 people working on it, it'll create preview builds. Yep. It's for it should be for commits. Yeah, it should be for commits on a branch that Vercel can see. Yep. And we'll see an example of when you kind of merge in your branch, you'll also get to see that there. Yep. Good question. So now I have a question for you. You can talk 1 minute, talk about this for a minute with your people around you. Is this CI, so continuous integration, or CD, continuous delivery? And so if it helps, I have kind of I have a recap on what these things are. And so we'll take a minute and you can talk about it and then we'll come back together. All right, everyone, any thoughts on this? Maybe we'll do, to do this probably a better way, raise your hands for CI, maybe. Okay, and then CD, raise your hand. Good, so it is CI, continuous integration, and maybe what was in parentheses kind of gave it away a little bit, right? So automatically building your code as soon as a new, or building your project as soon as a commit is made, that is what we're doing here in these preview builds, right? We're not necessarily deploying and making a new version of the project visible to actual users, maybe to us, right? We're making it visible to us as a developer, but not to our users. So perfect, right? So CI here is correct. And now I'm going to show a quick demo of just this particular part here. So I'm going to go in here and see if I can get my, whoops. That's not right. There we go. I'm going to try and get this open real quick in VS Code. There we go. So let me turn this back on. Let's see. There we go. So open this up in VS Code here. I have this example. And actually, you can see this example as well. It's public on the class repository. On the class organization in GitHub. We're not going to be doing anything necessarily groundbreaking here. We're just going to be kind of going through and seeing this process. So I think what will also help with this is I have this particular project here right now deployed live online. So you can go to, for example, Vercel CI/CD example.vercel.app, and you'll see this project is currently running. So this is my domain, right? Vercel CI/CD example.vercel.app. Here is my website. And the code for this is not that, not that big. It's just one single H1 tag. And if we open up my terminal here, there we go. You can see I'm currently on the main branch, right, on my Git repository. And so say that I want to create a new branch, create a new feature, right? So I'm going to go here and I'm going to try and create a new branch for that. So I can say, for example, git switch create. So this is switching to a new branch and creating it along the way. And then I'll just write here feat for feature in class example. All right, so you can see I have created now and switched to this branch. And so now all I'm going to do is I'm going to change this text a little bit. So I'm going to change it from hello world to hello 426, like that. I'm going to save my code. And now I'm just going to commit this change and push it to GitHub, right? So I'm going to go here. And remember, this is standard Git commands here. We're just going to add this change. We'll make a commit, change text as our commit name. That's not correct syntax. And then we're going to push. So git push origin and then feat in class example. Is there? Did that just start? Okay, well then this example is probably not going to work. So thank you for that. I know that different things, like I think some AI apps went down earlier today because of Cloudflare. So, well, GitHub is working here, but I suppose that maybe this particular change is not working. I'm going to try real quick to do this manually in github.com and see if this works. So we'll ignore this. We'll kill this command. And I'm going to try and create a new branch. You should never develop like this, by the way. But we'll see what we can do. So new branch, feat in class example. We'll create a branch. There we go. We have a branch. And then on this branch, I will then make a change. So I'll go to pages, index.tsx, edit manually, and hello 426. Commit changes, feat, change text, and we'll commit to this branch. I'm surprised that that worked, but luckily we have a change here. So now we have a new branch. We have our change, right? And so if I go now to Vercel, and I'm hoping that this works, you'll notice down here, we now have a new item here for our active branches. And we see that in-class example it's now appearing on Vercel. And you'll also see here that we have a preview button associated with this. And we also have kind of a little icon that's yellow, and we have some hash here. If I click on this branch, you'll actually see that it's currently building this particular change that we just made, right? So we're currently working on it. And you'll see on the right-hand side, we have this environment here. It says preview, right? So this is a preview build. And you can see we're building. If I go into logs, right, you can see that we're currently running all of this. And this is where I think that we may have a failure if GitHub is not working, because this cloning might not work. So let's see if it takes some time. If it does, we'll have to, let's see if it works here. Yeah, okay. So it's looking like this is probably going to hang because GitHub is still down. But essentially what's happening, you can kind of see it at least getting started. So this is helpful, right? This idea that we're essentially creating a new deployment, and this deployment URL you see is different than the Vercel CI/CD example.vercel.app, right? We have this brand new URL that if we clicked on, you'd actually see the text hello 426, and that is different than Vercel CI/CD example.vercel.app, right? And so, of course, this is going to take a very long time, but you can also see here in my list of deployments in Vercel, we have our main deployment here, which you can see is production. You see it says production there. We also have a little blue arrow saying that this is currently what is live online, right at our URL. And then you'll notice here that we have a separate preview build that we can create and look at once everything is running. And of course, when GitHub is actually working and online. I feel like this semester has been, we've had AWS go down. We had Cloudflare today go down. We had, I think Microsoft Azure went down as well. So the entire internet is crumbling as we're going through the semester, which is very unfortunate. But we'll work with what we have today. So thank you for your patience on that. You can take my word for it, and maybe if it works, if it turns back on by the end of the lecture, you'll actually see all these deployments will end up working. So again, if it was working, right, preview deployments are helpful because they run, right, a full build. They run your code, they build it, allowing you to see any errors that might happen, catch any issues, and then if there are any build errors, you can go and fix those. And it's always a good idea as you're developing, as you're working on new features, to constantly check your preview deployment. Because you can see, is my project currently working? Did I introduce any bugs? You can kind of test it in the production environment and see, is this like looking pretty good once I get this up and running? Would users be able to use it? These are all good things you can check. And again, we'll talk about the last point in a second. We can also kind of add other tools into our build process that help us to notify us of other errors that may happen, or errors that we can essentially create for whatever purposes we have. We'll talk about that in a bit. All right. And so as we continue on here, right, for example, if I let's say that I add a profile editor, so now you can change, right, details in your profile, and I commit that, Vercel will create another preview deployment for that. And I can see my project at this point. I can even look at both of these preview deployments, because let's say that I commit this and I don't get any errors, but then when I'm using it, something feels off or something looks like it changed. I can look at both of these two deployments and side by side and see what are the differences, right, between these two different versions of my site. And this is a good way of debugging. And so then finally, once you are typically ready to get your feature, like your feature is done, you want to merge your feature right into the main branch so that everybody can access this new feature. You typically create a GitHub pull request, right? So you can see here, let's say that I've now made my profile page. I want this to be accessible to all my users. Well, this is then the next step. I would go and create a PR. And the cool thing with Vercel as well is that when I create a PR, we also get a new preview build. So we get a preview build whenever we create a PR as well, which is really helpful for us to test and make sure that our project is looking good before we go and actually merge this into main. I'm going to show this here briefly. And again, I doubt that the actual deployment is going to work, but it might get at least kicked off. So you can see the deployment get started. So if we go to pull requests, and let's say I create a new pull request. I'm trying to merge right in class example here into main. And again, it's fascinating to me that the website for GitHub is working, but everything else is broken. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. But if I create a PR here, right, I'm trying to merge this into main, you'll notice that Vercel right here has added these steps into this GitHub process. And what it's actually doing is, you can see here, Vercel is now running a deployment for my app once I created this PR. And then it's also going to essentially show me that in a comment, which you can see right here. So Vercel has this bot that added a comment into my PR saying, right, here is the latest version of your project. We're deploying it. And there's also a preview that you can go and look at. Of course, right now, because everything's down, this will not turn green. It'll be stuck on this deployment step. But this is great because you can now just click directly from this PR. Let me see the state of my project at this time. Let's say that I make another change on this branch. It will then show me, create a new preview. And so this is a great way before I go and say, all right, I'm ready to launch this feature. I can look at it one more time, make sure everything is working as expected. Any questions here? Great. All right. And so now say that you're ready to merge, right, this PR into main, meaning that I want to create a new merge commit here. You can see that this would be the equivalent. So once I'm done with this feature, I want to merge this into main. I'll create a new merge commit here. In this case, this diagram is slightly misleading, because if you know Git quite well, main would probably point to this particular commit because there's no other, like main has not branched off anywhere, but this is just for sake of diagramming. So we have some sort of merge commit. And you'll see here that now I have a new commit on main. So main is pointing to a new commit. And so, well, now that main has moved, we have a new commit on the main branch. Vercel will create a production build, right? So instead of this preview build, it's going to create a full production build. And our domain is then going to move over to this new production build. So once I'm ready to launch my profile feature, we create a new build. And Vercel is going to move the domain and now point to the version of my project that includes this new feature. And if I go to now example.vercel.app here, you'll see it live on the main domain. And so open question. We already kind of talked about this, right? So is this CI or CD? Anyone could just shout it out. Louder. People are saying it correctly, but they're whispering it. Louder. Great. OK. That was still a whisper, but we'll take it. CD. Correct, right? This is CD because we are, we've deployed our project, or we've added a new feature. We've deployed this live, and now users can actually see this working. Again, a very broken demo here. I'm going to show what this would look like. Again, deployments are not working. But if I go ahead and go back to GitHub here, and I were to just merge this into main, so I merge this PR directly. In Vercel, in deployments, you now see that we have queued a new production build. So we have production build. It's waiting because, of course, the other one is still not working. But we have a new production build. And this current label here, once it builds successfully, would jump up to the new production build. So this is what your users will actually end up seeing. Any questions on this part here? Amazing. So again, if this was actually working, this would be a little bit better to show off. What I will say, though, is maybe I'll send an announcement, because this should, once GitHub comes back online, this should work. And actually, if you go to the repository in the PR tab, you should see the preview build actually show up and the production build actually work. So this is something that you all may have seen in your projects, right, on your forks that you have been using. But if you go right to GitHub and go to kind of this page, you'll see that we have like a deployment section here on the right-hand side. Vercel adds this for you. And so if you have a preview build working, you'd see production and you'd see preview. So for example, if I went to my course, the course website, which I think would be a good example here. So let's just go to the website, which is down here. Right, so this is the course website's repository. Actually, this one's not going to work because this is a GitHub Pages thing. But I guess this is a good thing to show off, right? So if I use another provider like GitHub, you can see that this still shows up here in this deployment section. I'm trying to think of what might be a reasonable, maybe if I jump to like a private repository here for like the solution to A03. So if I jump into this, Is this deployed? This might not be deployed either. Well, again, once everything is up and running, you'll see these links working. I was trying to find an example. Maybe if I find one later that has everything deployed. I don't think I deployed this one. So there'd be an example. I don't want to show A6 and A7 because there are still people who are working on that. So we'll hide that there. All right. So there's other things that I want to kind of talk about here, which is this idea of essentially other tools that we can add to our build process that help us to do various things. And this main type of tool here that I want to kind of show off here is what's known as a linter. So if you've noticed in your project, whenever you save your project, if you're in the dev container, right, everything, your code kind of automatically formats. If you have, I think, an A7 and A6, right, if you type Tailwind styles and save, it gets reordered nicely into the correct order. There's all this formatting that is done on save. And this is because we've set up these tools. And these tools are great because they allow us to essentially conform to different style conventions. So this is called a linter. And there's two different tools here that we kind of use. One is Prettier. And so this is actually what does like whenever you save, for example, it reorders, formats, it uses Prettier to do so. Because Prettier is essentially saying that we have some style guide, some convention that we want to follow. And we're just going to take your project and format it to follow that convention. And then ESLint here is a tool that will essentially throw errors when your style guide or your best practices are not followed. So if you've ever done any of our assignments, for example, and you try deploying to Vercel, and then you get red text, and it says like you have a variable that is unused that you've defined, or your import is unused that's not defined, right? Those errors are all happening because we have set up linting in your project. So it's saying that we have a style guide that we want to enforce. This style guide includes that you do not just define variables that are unused or import things that are unused, right? You're not allowed to do that. And so what happens is when we build the project, if we see, like if the linter here, this ESLint sees that you have that in your project, it's going to cause an error that breaks the build, right? And says that, build error, couldn't build, you need to go back and fix this, right? And so many of you have probably been caught up on that at some point throughout the semester because, it's very easy to forget that and it happens, right? But that is an example of this particular tool being installed in your build process. This is extremely good for various reasons, but I have a question that I want you to think about why. So talk with the people around you 3-ish minutes, and then we'll come back together as to why we'd want to go through the trouble of setting this up in our repositories. All right, everyone. Any thoughts on this? Some benefits of having a setup like this with linting. Yeah. Exactly. This is such an important point, right? You all are working now on final projects in groups. And well, everyone has a different way sometimes of writing code or different opinions about how code should be structured. For example, maybe in Java, TypeScript, it's not really the same thing, but in Java, you have this idea of sometimes, right, you have an if statement. Let me see if I can write this out here. Because I know there's a lot of debate over this. If my tablet will turn on. And yep, there we go. So, sometimes you have like if some condition, and then you have like your braces like so. Some people do if condition and then braces like so, right? People have different opinions on how things should be structured. And the problem is that if you have a code base shared with a lot of people and everyone is writing code in a different way, things can become really messy. So the entire idea of this is say, you know what? We do not care about what your personal preference is. We are going to follow a guide that has been universally kind of approved by most people. Oftentimes, you're following like a style guide created by Google, sometimes created by the person who made the programming language itself, and is saying that, you know what, your opinion may be great, but for this project, everyone's going to use the same thing, and we're going to force that every time that you essentially save your project or you go and build it, then you should conform to our standards. Any other points here that anyone has? Yeah. Everyone has to read the same way, but you can write however you want. Yeah, great point. So that adds on even to what we were talking about, right? Is that, well, even if people had different ways of preferences of writing the code, well, once you go and save it and push it up, right, it automatically reformats. So if somebody is not used to doing things in a particular way, it doesn't really slow them down because they can code in the way they're used to, and then once they save, it'll just reformat, or it'll tell you if something is unformatted. And then the last thing here that I want to point to is kind of this idea of, they call this sometimes, I know this terminology is used in various ways. It's like tech debt, right? This idea that as you're developing and as time goes on, right, if you kind of either take shortcuts, you write things in a way that's not optimal, you, for example, leave a bunch of variables that are unused in your code base, for example, as time goes on and as that keeps happening and as various people keep doing that, it starts adding more and more and more kind of junk, right, into the code. And you eventually get to a point where the project becomes, for example, bloated or hard to read, or there's all these unnecessary things in there. And so the great thing is that if you have a linter, for example, that's telling you right when you do it that there's an error and you go and delete it, well, then it never makes it into the code base and it can never kind of compound on top of each other. So all of these tools are very, very important. And I believe in your final project, in kind of the repo that we set up, we have all of this already provided for you. But it's very, very important. And this goes beyond just TypeScript. There's linters in nearly every language and formatters in every language. And so it's very important. This is a key software engineering tool that is used, especially in larger projects. And then the last thing here that I want to kind of go through is this idea of analytics, right? So we talked about this kind of in the beginning as one of our key features of these deployment platforms. And Vercel, for example, and other platforms too, provide really helpful analytics for our project. So for example, I'm going to open up this doc here, and they provide some examples on how to kind of get all of this set up. But essentially, let me search up here, Vercel, analytics, web analytics. There we go. So you can see there's various things that Vercel can keep track of. For example, visitors on your page, views of different pages. So for example, if you scroll down, they have like details of what are the different pages, for example, that people are actually visiting. We have other analytics, such as things like refers. So refers is referring to as well, where was the person maybe previously before they went to your site? Right, so that's something that is very useful to know. For example, here you can see a lot of people found this example site on Google. A lot of people also found it through GitHub, maybe through Bing, for example. And you can see other information, for example, about countries of where people are coming, accessing the site from, the type of device, right, that the user is using, Windows or Mac, right, operating system. And so all of these analytics, this is just scratching the surface of what analytics can do. This is just tracking kind of user behavior in terms of how are they visiting the site, through what type of device or operating system or method are they viewing the site, et cetera, et cetera. And analytics can be extended even further than that. And you can really keep track of really granular things in your project. In fact, for example, if you're an engineer, I'm sure at Meta, for example, right, every single user interaction that you do on Instagram and Facebook is being tracked, and they're performing analytics on it. Everything from like how long you see a post to how you're scrolling, everything is tracked. And so how is this actually done? Well, you can essentially create what are known as these custom events that you can keep track of. So for example, if I am working on Oriole, and I want to keep track of how many times somebody presses the follow button, or every time that somebody creates a new post, right? These are events that are happening, and we can essentially create these custom events in our analytics tool. And then you can see here that you can use a framework, for example here, Vercel Analytics, to track that event. So for example, when a user clicks on a button to sign up, you can just write here track sign up. And that particular string, that's like the name of the event. And then in your analytics console, whenever someone presses this, it'll say, well, there was somebody who pressed that button. Right? So for example, here, in your on click for a button, you can add a track and track analytics for this particular action. You can even keep track of data associated with an action. So for example, sign up, right? Maybe a user pressed the sign up button, but you want to know where did they press the sign up button. Maybe you had a sign up button in your header, in your footer, somewhere on your page. You want to keep track of exactly what button they pressed. Well, you can keep track of that with providing like another object with more information. Or for example, making a purchase. If somebody purchased, right, shoes, for example, you can pass that information along with the purchase event. And this allows you to do very fine-grained analytics on these events. You can, for example, take your signups and figure out, right, what is the most likely way, or what is kind of the most common way that people sign up on my site? What is the most, like, for example, views on a purchased item, or like on a shopping item. So maybe they don't purchase it, but they click on it a lot of times. You can keep track of how many page visits, or like how many times somebody clicked on something. Or maybe, again, in a social media app, right, you can go as far as to track when somebody starts looking at a post and when they stop looking at the post, based on whether that particular, for example, UI component for a post is on the screen or is not on the screen. And so when it's, right, when you scroll into view, you can have a track, start looking at post, here's a timestamp, here's the post, here's the user. And then when you scroll away, there you can track that they stopped looking at the post, again, post, timestamp, user, etc. So this is how companies, especially ones like very large companies that collect a lot of data, again, Meta is the example that and I'm sure a lot of people, right, use for this. They are keeping track of all of that information. For example, just even like how long you look at posts, maybe how many times you scroll on a post. All of this is extremely valuable information to them, because if they are able to take that and do something with it and try and, maybe even do some research into it, they can try and extract the most amount of time out of you that you're on that particular page. Right? So all this analytics, you'll find that a lot of companies find this analytics extremely important. And of course, user data, the more you collect of user data, the more you can essentially either capitalize on it. You can see maybe if there's like something going wrong, or like a common issue that users have that you can find their analytics, then you can fix it easier. And so a lot of companies end up tracking all of these different things. And so you can implement, right, a lot of this type of stuff in your own projects using these different track calls. And again, for better or for worse, right, this is something that is done. And analytics, again, is a very important thing. It can be used in ways, right, for example, that are ultimately harmful to users, as some companies, like a lot of social media companies, do. But there are also some cases where they can be used to further improve your application in different ways, right? So this is a tool. How you use it, of course, can be used in different ways, but it is still very important to talk about, because most large-scale deployed applications have some sort of analytics attached to it. Any questions here? All right. And again, there's some information here on the dashboard of how you can see analytics. So I will actually try. I don't think in my case, in my project, I have any analytics here, because I don't think I have done it recently. But you can see here, there's like if I press on the CI/CD example, there's an analytics tab, right? I don't have analytics set up. You can kind of see that this is where you would find all of this information in your projects. For example, maybe one example of where analytics could be used well is, for example, on Connect Carolina. Every time somebody enters something into the cart or searches up a course, you can essentially use that information to determine what are the courses that are the most kind of sought after by students, and therefore maybe assign more professors to teach those courses, create more sections for those courses, et cetera, right? So that's maybe a positive use of analytics. All right, and there are many other providers. So Google Analytics, for example, I know Posttalk is another one. I'm sure Netlify and other services all provide analytics. Vercel is easy in this case because it's all kind of built in with what you're using. So that's why we're showing this off here. And then another thing that kind of is maybe somewhat related to analytics, because it can be used as well in conjunction with analytics a lot of times to kind of figure out information and collect kind of usage data, is this idea of feature flags. And so feature flags are something where essentially you want to determine, right? The key idea is there are times and certain cases where maybe you want to have some sort of feature appear on the site where you want to just be able to turn it on. So for example, a page appearing, you want to just turn that on and then maybe turn it off. So maybe if you're doing something experimental, for example, maybe you are working on a new UI update. So for example, I know Instagram has done this recently where they've kind of organized tabs and whatnot on their page. They might say that, well, I want to test out this new UI. So we're going to essentially use a feature flag to turn that feature on. And then maybe we'll collect analytics on it and then turn the feature off and then collect analytics and then determine which one ends up having higher engagement, for example, or which one do users end up either preferring or using more. And so you can use this very quick toggling of features without having to constantly redeploy, like publish a page and then create a commit that essentially hides the page and then create a new commit that shows the page. Instead, we can use feature flags to make it very easy to turn on and off these features. And so you can set this up in various ways. Like Vercel has kind of examples of this here. And I think that there are some tools like this Flags SDK, which there's some details on. And a lot of this, again, there's post-hog that we talked about. There's a lot of these different providers at this point that can help you do this. But besides implementation, you don't have to do this for final projects, of course, and it's overkill a lot of times for smaller apps. But it's very useful to at least know this exists because you can then use that later on in projects that you might need to set it up for. Questions with that? Terrific. So one last thing here is that we will be requiring that all the teams at least set up Vercel Analytics on their project. You don't need to go crazy and track a bunch of things. We just want you to at least be able to keep track of, for example, page views and things like that. And the details for how to do so are actually on this page. So if you go back to your docs page up here, sorry, which slide is this? Let's try and lost my cursor. Where? One second here. I have lost there we go. My pointer was gone for a second. So if you go back all the way to, I believe, the analytics slide, which is this one right here, slide 24, there is this particular link, vercel.com docs analytics quick start. And so if you go into this website, you want to make sure that whenever it says install commands, make sure you select npm, We're using npm as our package manager. We're not using pnpm or bun or yarn in this class. So use npm, and you can essentially run through these steps. Install this package. You can click this nice button to go directly to web analytics and turn it on. Install this package, and then all you have to do is just add the analytics component into your project. And that's all you have to do to get this set up. So it's important to set up in a lot of projects, and so we're asking you to set it up in your final project. It's kind of free points though, because of course, the setup here is pretty standard. One thing you'll notice is that you'll need to change. So this drop down here, it says Next.js app. Make sure to select here Next.js pages, which is the second option. That's what we're using in this class. And then you'll see you just go into app.tsx and you just paste in this component directly into the project. So everyone know, where the link is? It is, again, in the slide deck on slide 24, this particular docs this blue docs page. And what I would like you to do is with your team, if you're sitting near them, if not, one of you can try to at least get this up and running. We want you to add this to your project, and then you will submit a screenshot of this to Gradescope. And so we'll use the next 10 to 15 minutes to do this. In addition, as part of the Gradescope submission, you'll need to submit a selfie of you being in this classroom, Haynes Art Center. So as well, take a photo today. Do not use an old photo because it will not be counted. It must be taken today with today's timestamp. So take it today, upload it, and that'll count as attendance. The TAs will be helping. They'll be walking around to help you get your Vercel analytics set up as needed here. All right, everyone. So sorry, it took me a while to get this mic turned on because the battery died. As it's been made aware to me, some of you have not cloned your project yet because GitHub is down, you can't clone it. So if you have it locally and commands are working, like on any one person in your team has it, you could try to get it to work. If it does not, though, because for example, Vercel is not set up, you should be able to create. I'm assuming, and maybe this is the wrong assumption. In Vercel, you should be able to create at least the project without having to have it deployed. So you should be able to link it to a GitHub project. If that fails, though, then you can write in the box saying that GitHub is down, and as long as you have the screenshot of your selfie, then that'll be fine for attendance. But just make sure that at some point before the final submission, you make sure to set up analytics. And once you submit on Gradescope, you are also free to leave for today, and we'll see you all on Thursday.